Today is probably going to be a little bit of a shorter webinar. However, we do have it full of content and great information for all of you guys. So let's go ahead and get started. First, our plan. We're going to start out with defining / kind of reviewing strategies. We're not going to go super in depth on it because I know we've been hitting hard on strategies the past couple months in our webinars. So I feel like you guys have a really good background on those. We're just going to review them so you have them fresh in your mind though. And then, like I said, we have Erica with us today who's going to kind of share some successes / strategies that they've used to particularly implement their social hosting ordinance. So we'll get into that later on. So first things first, I wanted to start with defining what exactly a strategy is. We just want to know what is the definition of a strategy, because sometimes I think we tend to jump automatically when we hear the word strategy. Oh, the 7 behavior change strategies. We got to know all those, right? However, sometimes I think it's important to take a step back and really look at, well, what exactly is a strategy, just by itself? So I kind of did some digging on the internet and came up with a couple different definitions, just so we can look at it from a broader perspective. And the first one I came up with is a strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve a major or overall aim. So this is going to be one of our kind of ways we want to step back and look at strategy today. Some of our other ones are going to be maybe a strategy to you is the art of devising or employing plans towards a goal. We also have maybe it's a method or plan chosen to bring about a desired future goal or solution. And then we also have maybe it's just the art and science of planning. We are planners, and sometimes you have to take those planning steps in order to make sure that your goal gets achieved. So it could just be the art of planning and using those resources in your area to really achieve your desired outcomes. And then the last one that I found is that a strategy is a plan to achieve one or more goals under conditions of uncertainty. And I think with the work that we do in our coalitions, in our local areas, falls heavily under this one, because there's a lot of times that there are, certain conditions that we have to work under. There might even be a lot of uncertainty that we have to, work around and figure out how to use those strategies to overcome that. So really, when I read all of these definitions, and me being the fairly big sports fan that I am, I come to the realization that pretty much the definition of a strategy is kind of like a coach's playbook. At the end of the day, you guys as coalition leaders and staff are simply trying to reach specific outcomes, just like a coach is trying to beat a specific opponent. And this is where we start to then think of the 7 behavior change strategies specifically as kind of our players, or things that we can use to really achieve our goals or outcomes that we intend to. So that is kind of my broad spectrum that sometimes I like to step back and look at, because a lot of times, like I said, we get in the rut of, strategies, 7 behavior change strategies. What are those? I got to make sure I know what those are. And yes, that is important, but sometimes I think it can help to take a step back and look at, okay, well, what actually is a strategy? And then really dive into each of the 7 specifically. That way we have a good kind of look at what those are. Now that we have our strategy definition, looking at the 7 behavior change strategies specifically, and I know most of you here today are very seasoned veterans of our training or webinar sessions. So I know we've been talking about these a lot lately. I just wanted to kind of get them in your face again. We're not going to go in depth about each one or what the definitions of each one are, but hopefully these do look familiar. We have our environmental strategies along the top, and then we also have our individual strategies along the bottom. And as we kind of go through today's session, and here in a second when Erica kind of comes on and starts talking about how her coalition has addressed the social hosting issue, I want you guys to really think of these in the back of your mind and be able to kind of associate them with some of the things she's talking about. She might be talking about the social host ordinance specifically, And turn it on over to Erica, and she can go ahead and introduce herself and share some information.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's good to see lots of Iowa people on this. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna do a little bit of background information about our coalition and then kind of go into the steps that we took to pass a local social host ordinance. So our coalition is RC Rail Coalition, which stands for Rural Communities Rising Above the Influence in Lynn. We currently have a Drug-Free Communities grant, which we just started in our 9th year. And then we also have a Stop Act grant that we're currently just starting our 3rd year in. We serve 3 rural communities in Lynn County, which include Lisbon, Central City, and Mount Vernon. And our one town of Mount Vernon actually has a small liberal college in it. And I'm going to kind of go into that as we go through the slides about how that worked in passing our social host ordinance and how we worked with them. Our focus of our coalition is to reduce underage drinking, tobacco use, marijuana, and other drugs among youth. Oops. So first, our definition of a social host ordinance. A social host ordinance is a law that holds adults accountable for providing alcohol to minors or allowing minors access to alcohol. Okay, so the first step I wanted to kind of talk about before even trying to pursue a local social host ordinance is that there needs to be kind of 3 components that are successful to pass a local ordinance that we found out that needs to kind of be at the table and support the passing of a local social host ordinance. And that would be your law enforcement, your city or county attorney, and then the substance use prevention workers. In particular, the prevention workers like myself, my coworker Cassie, and our substance abuse agency worked really hard to do all of the kind of education, the background work before we even started looking at social host ordinance. And so we kind of brought together the law enforcement, we brought together the city attorney, we provided them the essential information they needed. If they had any questions, we are the ones that kind of went and found that information for them. And we kind of did all the background stuff. And so I feel like in order to have something that's successful and for it to pass, you really need to have these 3 components in place beforehand before moving forward to even step 2 or even looking into passing a social host ordinance. So the next thing that our coalition did is that we started reviewing current social host ordinances that there are. So in the state of Iowa, there is a social host ordinance in Iowa, and there's also one in Lynn County, which is the county that we have our 3 communities in. And so even though the state and the county have social host ordinances, there was something about both those ordinances that just did not fit our community well, and that there was some loopholes in some of them, and we just wanted a stronger social host for our own community. So that's why we started kind of looking at taking a look at a local social host ordinance. So what we first did was we looked at other ordinances. Like I said, Lynn County, Jones County in Iowa has a great social host ordinance, a local one. Benton County, we looked at West Des Moines, Dubuque, we looked at state of Iowa, MAD, there's one in California, and then there's one in Kentucky. And if you just go online and you search social host ordinances, you'll probably find, that's what all we did. We just kind of Googled it, we found different ordinances, and we started just kind of reading through, skimming through, looking at wording, looking at loopholes of other ordinances, and kind of looking and starting compiling our information from there. So when we started looking at the other ordinances throughout the county, throughout the state, and also throughout the country, we started looking at like terminology. So what words or terminology were similar in all the ordinances? And then we started looking at loopholes that might make an ordinance weaker. And we took those and made sure that our ordinance was maybe stronger or fit our community better. From there, we compiled all the terminology from all the social host ordinances that we had kind of taken a look at. We drafted those ordinances that fit our community and was all encompassing. And from there, we took the ordinance to our law enforcement and our city attorney, just a draft of it to say, you know, this is kind of what we are looking at. We think this would be a great fit for the communities that we serve. What are your thoughts on that? So that was kind of like step 3 that we did before going any further. And I should say that step 3 was a really long process. It took us a while to get all of those other ordinances to kind of get the draft compiled, to get approved by the law enforcement and city attorney. We did a lot of back and forth, you know, and that's another where the prevention staff was very important, because we did a lot of the, you know, going to the law enforcement, going to city attorney, coming back, redoing it, going back again. And it was just a lot of back and forth that kind of took a lot of time. So if you are at that step, do not get frustrated. It's a long process, but it's very much worth it that you have a really strong ordinance when you come finally to the end to present it to your city council. The next one is to review the draft ordinance. And so this should include your coalition members, those who maybe were not part of the initial drafting, just to get their approval, make sure that they think it looks how they want it to look, to make sure it fits the communities that they serve. Like I said, law enforcement, that's key. You want to make sure that the ordinance is enforceable, that's a tool for law enforcement. That was another thing, is that you want to make sure this is a tool for your law enforcement and that they are able to utilize this tool. And then also, you know, making sure the city attorney that it's, you know, if somebody is presented with a social host, that they can be penalized for that as well. So city attorney is very important as well to be at the table when reviewing the draft ordinance. The next step is gathering support. So like I mentioned before, one of our communities that we passed a local social host ordinance with was Mount Vernon, which has a small liberal college at it. And so we knew that in order to get this ordinance passed in Mount Vernon, that we really needed the college's support. And so we had to gather supports from them, have meetings with them to tell, you know, to talk about, you know, what they would like the ordinance to look like, how we could help them, what they didn't want in it. And we'll kind of talk about that later on. So we gather support from the college, the dean, from other community members. In particular, in Mount Vernon, there was a lot of community members who wanted that social host because they themselves owned a home, they lived near these party houses, and they wanted something to be done. And so we went to those community members trying to get their support to get what they wanted from the ordinance as well. We got support from local schools. Our superintendent wrote a letter of support for us. Our principals wrote a letter of support for us. And we use those letters of support for later on through the next, when we actually start presenting at the city council meetings. We involve community stakeholders, landlords. Like I said, our ordinance in Lisbon includes landlords can be penalized if they have party houses. And so that's something that we wanted to make sure that we got letters of support or support from our landlords and educating them on what the ordinance was going to look like, and if it was passed, what that would look like to them as landlords. And then we had educational meetings, in particular with the landlords in our communities. And one of the great things about our communities is that our law enforcement was so in support of our social host ordinance that they actually themselves went out and they got a list of all the landlords they knew of that were in the communities, and they started having these one-on-one meetings with landlords and doing the education for them. So it was something that myself and my coworker and our coalition didn't do. The law enforcement just took upon themselves, and they did that on their own time, and they did these little educational meetings with landlords to kind of get them up to speed on what the social host looked like and what that meant for them as well. So it was a great thing. We really appreciated them doing that. And like I said, again, it kind of goes back to the beginning where you really need that law enforcement to be on your side with this. Step 6 was we presented the ordinance to the city council. So when we went to city council, we had kind of two different scenarios. So in our one community at Lisbon, we went in, it was voted 1, 2, 3. We had no problems. And not all communities are like that. And I think probably most of the time it's not that easy. It was just our police chief was really on board, our city council was on board, and it got passed very quickly. When we went to Mount Vernon, which was our second town that we passed the local ordinance, it wasn't so easy. And so we, we went into that first meeting, we were all gung-ho, we were enthusiastic, we're like, this is going to be easy. And it wasn't like that initially. And so we had to kind of step back, and we had to, take a look at what can we bring to city council members for them to support this ordinance. And so what we did was we kind of our toolbox of things. We presented letters of support that we presented to them at meetings, and that came from, like I said, parents, it came from the schools, it came from community members, it came from local key stakeholders, it even came from some landlords who really wanted this ordinance to pass. At all of our meetings, we had our local substance abuse agency representative there in case they had any questions that maybe myself or the city attorney or somebody could not answer that were well knowledge in it. They were always there. We always had community members there that were in support of the ordinance, and they gave their own testimonial stories about how this ordinance would help them. We had parents who came up to the microphone and said how, they lived next to these party houses and their small children were seeing, these parties going on and that sort of thing. We had youth come and talk to our city council. And then we always had, I shouldn't say always, at our first meeting, we did not have our city attorney there. And we realized really quickly that a city attorney needs to be there at all the meetings when the social host is being looked at, because they have the answers to questions we do not know, and they can answer those questions. So if we look back on it, we would definitely always have a city attorney at those city council meetings. So step 7 is some takeaways. It's a lengthy process. From the step 1 to step 7, it's a long process. And it's like, you just don't want to get frustrated. There might be, you might take 2 steps ahead and 10 steps behind, you feel like. Like I said, Lisbon's was super easy to pass. The background stuff, took a while to get the ordinance, what the draft will look like. In Mount Vernon, it was a lot lengthier process. They kept installing the ordinance at city council meetings. And so we just had to keep on always following up with city council members after meetings and saying, okay, what other questions do you have? How can we help you? And we kept on doing that. And eventually it was passed. The only difference between Mount Vernon and Lisbon's ordinances is that Lisbon, like I said, includes landlords. Mount Vernon does not include landlords. And the reason being is that we initially had asked them to include landlords in their ordinance, but the college said they supported the ordinance, but they did not want to include landlords because the college owns a lot of apartments and they did not want to be responsible or fined if there was a party going on. And so that's one thing that we did delete off the Mount Vernon Sydney ordinance. So the other thing is always listen to what people are saying around the ordinance. Like I said, follow up with your city council members, follow up with community members, answer those questions that they may have, give them more information that they may need in order to make, to vote in favor of it. And then the other one is that, like I said before, city attorney needs to be at all the meetings when it's being discussed. And I just feel like that's just really important. Otherwise, you really can't progress on that meeting, because there's usually a lot of questions that city council members have that can only be answered by the city attorney or the county attorney. Step 8 is education. So educate after the ordinance is passed, or even during having the city or the social host ordinance looked at. Make sure you educate the community on what that looks like. So one study found that social host ordinances were more effective when parents were aware of the law and local police actively enforced it. So right now, what we're doing as education is that we had some billboards put up that just kind of gave a brief description of the social host and what the fines are for our social hosts. We also went into the college and educated them. And at any community events that we are a part of, our coalition is a part of, we always have information about the social host ordinance that we give that out to parents or community members. And so they're aware of that. And I think education is a continuous thing. Like this next fiscal year, that's something that we'll continuously do, is educating the community members about the social host. So some highlights of our own local ordinance, and like I said, all ordinances are different. Even in Iowa, our ordinance looks very different than what Jones County, Iowa ordinance looks like. So you just have to make sure the ordinance fits your needs as a community. So our ordinance is a civil infraction. And the reason for that is because, once again, kind of going back to the college in Mount Vernon, they did not want it to be a criminal infraction because they were afraid that if kids, got the social hosts, and then they would have this on their record and when they're trying to apply for jobs and that sort of thing. And so we ended up making it a civil infraction, which is different than our state social host ordinance, which is a criminal infraction. Our social host includes 18, 20-year-olds can be held liable if they're serving alcohol to minors. It includes landlords in Lisbon, but not in Mount Vernon. It also includes other substances. So not just alcohol, but includes like marijuana and other substances if they're found to be at the party or the house. There is a definition of consumption in our ordinance. And then our fines are tiered. So first to 3 offenses, you get warnings from the police, from the law enforcement. After that, your first offense is $750, and then your second offense and anything other is $1,000. So our fines are heavier than they are at the state level as well. So there's no difference between our local ordinance and our state ordinance. So any key points and concerns, and I actually have, if anybody afterwards wants me to email this out to them, I have a really good, it's just like a front and back of key points and concerns that it's good to have just in case when you do go, if you are going to start, looking at social host ordinance, it's just a good sheet. If people have these concerns, there's, what their concern is, and there's some information on how to address those concerns or how to answer their questions. So some key points as concerns is providing knowledge. So that was one concern, is how do you provide knowledge of, if someone's in violation of the social host? And it's basically, if anyone, if an adult is at a house and there's a party going on, that's a good knowledge that they know that there's minors drinking on their premises. It also has exceptions to the rule. So religious reasons, parents can still, provide alcohol to their children for religious reasons and not be fined under the social host. Or a parent can also provide alcohol to their own child in their home. So social host laws have been associated with fewer drunk drivers, a decrease of frequency of underage drinking in homes, and smaller size of team drinking groups is kind of what the research has shown are some of the benefits of a social host ordinance. Okay, that's it.
For today, just briefly, I want to thank Erica for, sharing with us today. She did a great job, helped you guys, I think, with some questions you might have had. But lastly, I just kind of want to talk about, a few different things. And the first one is not all strategies are going to be as helpful or useful as others may be when it comes to addressing social hosting or other strategies you might be working on. Some are going to have a better impact. Some are going to be easier to do. It just kind of depends. And that kind of goes into my next one. Some are easier. So obviously it's a lot easier to get out there and provide information. But as Erica was saying, all this work they've had to do, they've had to be patient, especially with trying to get the ordinance passed. So some of them are easier, such as providing information, whereas actually trying to get a new policy or ordinance in place can take a little bit more time and be a little bit more harder to achieve. And then the last thing is, no matter how many different strategies you plan to use, sometimes it's not always the easiest to reach your goals, or sometimes you might not reach your goal, or you hit a brick wall and you get kind of stuck. That is okay. We understand that sometimes there are roadblocks and walls in your way that you just cannot overcome maybe at that time. But just always remember to come back. It might just be, hey, maybe we need to sit down with our coalition staff and just look at our plan and look at what didn't work, and now maybe think about some different options and different strategies to use to maybe that will work.